number one way you're going to get yourself in trouble inside the prison population is if you're either taking or providing drugs, and if you're staying away from that area, you can kind of play a low profile. But I think it's that by affiliation part. So I wouldn't say so much that I managed to avoid it, but I knew I have a strong sense of identity in who I am.
Yeah.
So it's not like I was dragged into things.
And I think that's the challenge, really, a sense of identity. Where do I belong? And that's where the younger generation, the young people at 12, 13, they're still developing. They've not
Yeah.
even developed,
Even
it's hard.
sorry, I just quickly wanted to chime in. Even on identity, yeah, like young people growing up, where you're from, that little estate or postcode that you're from, that becomes like your nationality. See, like how you're proud to be a Nigerian or Jamaican or wherever you're from. To some people, like that's your flag. Do you understand? Like, you can't wait for someone to ask you where you're from. You can't wait to demonstrate where you're from.
But I think what's sad
Yeah.
is that a lot of young people don't realize that doesn't matter until it's too late. Like you're gonna lose your whole freedom.
Hello, welcome back to Echoes of Our Community, a place where real stories connect to genuine minds, a place where we're connecting every corner of what we think that can impact and motivate, educate, and engage. So please join me to welcome back Elio, Belumi, Davlan, and Joel. And I'm your host, Margaret Jimmy Taribo, and we will be talking about, is there hope after prison? Is there hope for our young people? Is there hope for us as parents? Is there hope for us as grandparents? Is there hope for the society? As we discuss this today, join us and let's have a fantastic time together. Yeah? So I'm going to go back to you, Joel. I want us to say, you've shared how that was for you, and after, what happened after, and then we can take it from there.
Yeah, I think I've acknowledged that prison for me was an opportunity in my life. This is my personal experience. It's a bubble, right? I describe prisoner as the great leveler, because when you walk through those doors, you're stripped of all the things that you identify in and that make you who you think you are, right? Literally, you wear the same tracksuit as everybody in those first times before you get your possessions back, and
So you get your possessions back after?
yeah, after a certain period of time. For me, I describe it as a period where I was able to address the man within the man, right? I was able to do inner work that was impossible for me to do on the outside. Okay. Not because that work can be done, but for me, I had come to this conclusion, if you like, this big, what at the time was a rock bottom. And, I had to address myself looking inwards. And I also acknowledged that it was some of my circumstances, the relationships that I had, some of the ways in which that I was blessed that allowed me to use that time positively. And I was describing it when off air as personal development boot camp on steroids, and that's how I was able to use it. I had access to the library. I did courses in there. And holistically, body, mind, and spirit, I was growing. My faith, my connection to God, what I was learning physically. I guess the big thing is you can't eat very well in prison, but exercise and not eating a lot of bad food. So I think in those areas I came out almost bouncing off the walls. I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna do X, Y, and Z. I'm not gonna let this experience shape me. It was the 2 years after that was the most difficult period of my life, without a shadow of a doubt.
Wow.
Because going back into the real world, going back to where there's normal problems, there's bills to pay, there's distractions, and for me, we speak about crossroads, and that's such a poignant metaphor for how life was for me at that point. I through the prison experience, developed a deep sense of purpose of what I should be doing. I knew that it was in service. I knew that it was around the work that I'm doing now, working with young people, working around systems change to do with all the things we're talking about, school to prison pipeline. But now being released, I felt incapable, I felt unworthy. And the conflict was, I also have lost everything, and I've lost my career, I lost my home, I ended up losing my marriage. I'm in a different area. So then the temptation was just do what puts food on the table quickly. So there was this inner turmoil. And I think even if I didn't leave prison with that sense of purpose, I call this process the purpose paradox, because it was the purpose that caused the conflict, right? Because if I came out without that in my conscience, then it was just I'll do what I need to do to survive.
Wow.
But I had this conflict of I know now for the first time what is the right thing, that the path that I should be on, but I feel incapable and conflicted.
That takes me to what Davlin was saying. So you had a purpose, but there were many young people in prison at 12, 13. They don't even know what they're doing. So if they come out, so in a way, in quote, you were fortunate,
Yeah.
but a lot of young people are not.
Yeah. Obviously, I don't know what age you went to jail, but you might even be better off. There's no good time to go to jail, let me
Yeah.
just say that. But you're better off knowing yourself when you go in there. Because if you don't, you're more likely to come out worse. In most cases, like, you're going to go in there, you're going to meet the guy that disappeared from your area 3-4 years ago. And, you're just going to buddy up again. And in jail, you either retire or you just become, it's like a breeding ground to become a better criminal. You meet people that have done things that you can't imagine. You meet people that are better at what you're trying to do than yourself, if that makes
And then
sense.
it becomes a competition, isn't it?
It's even a networking ground, if you think about it. Like, you meet people from East London, West London, all different parts. You might have been in a bubble in your area thinking that you're the only person that does this, but then you meet one guy from North London that does the same thing, and you find commonalities within these things. So
Wow.
yeah.
So, Joel, were you able to protect yourself from all that? Because, or did you hear that, or you just deliberately said, I'm not going to get into that. This is where I'm staying.
So for me, actually, I guess the way I'd say it is finding your tribe in prison, yeah. And it's funny because I'm mixed race. My dad is Jamaican, my mum is English, but I was in a jail that was predominantly Asian and white. So black was the minority, right? And as soon as I went into jail, there was a small group of black people on the wing, and that's just where I found belonging. That's my community. I've grown up in black communities, in black spaces, consider myself as part of the black community, and that's where you find home and belonging, which I think is, you see that a lot in prison, is where, like, for example, a lot of people convert to Islam in jail, and I can understand why, because that's one of the strongest communities in the
Wow.
prison. So,
Oh, I didn't know that.
you're looked after by the people that are in that same community, and I think you do have to find your community to be able to navigate it, but that also comes with some complications, because if the people on my wing, who I consider as my people, get into an issue, then you are expected to be part of the solution to said
My
issue.
days, that is complicated.
Yeah. So I think it's important to acknowledge, right? Like I've said, for me, it was personal development boot camp, and that is in no way diminishing from the severity of that environment and the harshness of what it was, and I think you become desensitized to violence. Violence is around you day in, day out, and you see crazy stuff in prison, and I wasn't immune to that. But I think, I was very much in my space, and I knew what I was going to use that experience for. So yeah, and I think that Devlin was saying, I can't speak to the lived experience of going to a young offenders institute, and I I really wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, you know, because I think in a man's prison, in an adult's prison, there is, okay, he's just doing his thing, leave him,
People
don't
just want
trouble
to
him.
do their
Yeah,
time.
yeah. There's I mean,
Not everyone, but
yeah, not everyone. The number one way you're gonna get yourself in trouble inside the prison population is if you're either taking or providing drugs, you know. And if you're staying away from that area, you can kind of play a low profile. But I think it's that by affiliation part. So I wouldn't say so much that I managed to avoid it, but I knew I have a strong sense of identity in who I am.
Yeah.
So it's not like I was dragged into things, you know.
And I think that's the challenge, really, a sense of identity. Where do I belong? And that's where the younger generation, the young people at 12, 13, they're still developing. They've not even developed,
even
it's hard.
sorry, I just quickly wanted to chime in, even on identity, yeah? Like, young people growing up, where you're from, that little estate or postcode that you're from, that becomes like your nationality. See, like how you're proud to be a Nigerian or Jamaican or wherever you're from. To some people, like that's your flag.
Your
Do you understand?
postcode, your area.
Like, you can't wait for someone to ask you where you're from. You can't wait to demonstrate where you're from.
But I think, you know what's sad?
Yeah.
Is that a lot of young people don't realise that doesn't matter until it's too late. You know, like, you're going to lose your whole freedom over a postcode or an estate where you own nothing, where it doesn't serve you.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
But this is what I'm saying, that speaking to the young mind, like even myself, I learned all of the Peckham songs before simultaneously whilst learning my times tables.
Before your
the
times
truth.
table.
My mum will say go revise. It's one browser, times tables, one browser. I got the Peckham songs on in the background.
Yeah.
Like, to me, growing up, yeah, that's like what you aspire to be. Like, truth be told, it's football, it's music, or they're just gonna
You
know
know what,
me
I
for
think
this.
You spoke about hope, yeah, and I think
Hope.
for me, what you're saying, someone asked me the question. I speak about upstream a lot. So my work and my academic pursuit is all around dismantling the school to prison pipeline. And there's a call to action, which I often quote by Desmond Tutu, which says, how long are we going to keep pulling the bodies out of the river until we go further upstream and find out why they're falling in the first place? So for me, my work, I guess, is kind of like building a fence at the top of the stream. And for want of a better phrase, it's not the sexy end of the problem, right? It's not where the headlines are made. It's not where the attention is. But someone asked me a really interesting question. I spoke on a panel about racism in schools in Parliament recently, and someone asked me a question of how upstream is upstream enough. You know, and that really made me ponder, and I love questions like that. And I think some of my best thinking and work has come from difficult questions that I don't necessarily have the answer to in the moment, but cause me to go away
And think about it.
and reflect.
Yeah.
So I think one of the other things that I notice when I speak about the school to prison pipeline, and you mentioned systems, so, you know, a lot of my work is around interdisciplinary systems change, and we look at how all these systems interconnect and which ones are interdependent on each other. You know, I think it's important to acknowledge that when we have a conversation about these things, we need to shift from looking at where does the blame belong and move to an understanding of collective responsibility to build hope through community. So for me, we can sit here all day long and look at, oh, well, schools do this, schools do that, parents don't do this, parents don't do that. And I think one thing that we can acknowledge is that it takes cross-system efforts. It takes education system to understand this work with criminal justice. It takes support
community
for the parents. Yeah. And I think that erosion of community, we've all heard the saying, it takes a village to raise a child.
There's no village.
But there is no village.
There is no village.
Do you know what I mean? So for me, you know, when you're talking about yourself, you going and learning those lyrics, and I don't know you at all or know your story, is probably not a reflection of the absence or the presence of anything that your parents were doing within your house. Was more a condition or socialization of what was happening from within that very specific area that you was in.
Exactly.
So that means a parent could be doing everything right,
Yeah.
but then they step out of that door. And I think that's where that separate thinking is problematic. We can't just say we have to work with parents or the schools need to do this better. It's how they interconnect.
That's the big challenge, though. It's a big one.
It's so complicated.
It is complicated.
Very complicated. And we're asking ourselves, what's the solution? I'm very happy that he broke it down in a way that he did, because it's not a straightforward one.
It's not.
Because if we all had the answers,
But you know what?
we'll be able to change the world now.
I agree and I disagree, because I think the systems also perpetuate the chaos that we're in, right? The reactionary nature of it. Because I said this to someone in this similar conversation the other day, was when I've seen multi-agency collaboration at its most effective is often at point of crisis, when something happens, like a young person being stabbed.
Always firefighting. We're always firefighting. It's that reaction.
So imagine if we had that multidisciplinary approach, but it was preventative, that it was further up the stream. And now, unfortunately, when we're talking about these things, we're talking about them because we're all coming from a place of care. So it's an ethical conversation. That reactive nature, the people that are, the systems, I think, unfortunately, it becomes about cost, not ethics.
Now you're talking, it's the cost.
Yeah.
And that is the reality. Whether it's in politics, they always look at what's going to be the cost of this. They know that it's right to do, but it's like, what's it going to cost?
When it comes to like questions about what is the cost, some of the models or the financial models they use don't consider the ethical considerations. They don't consider the things that are not necessarily measured by money, but will eventually impact, for the lack of a better term, business in the long run, because crime affects everyone. The prison system affects everyone. So I love what you said about collective responsibility, and something that the system perpetuates is you thinking you can't do anything. But I always believe that we can do something, even if it's in our small part of the system or wherever you're placed. Like, you can do something,
and that's the hope.
So can we speak about that then? Because you've negated to higher ups and cost management and all of that being a major problem and seeing what we see. So what's the solution? What can be done? What's our method of thought around that?
There is no what we proverbially call a silver bullet. There has to be many solutions to resolve the problem, because the root of that tree has got so many branches, and all we're dealing with, and I'm speaking in a metaphor now, we're just dealing with the issues, which are the leaves on the branches. We're not dealing with the root, where everything is being sapped from to feed this tree, this metaphoric tree. So I don't think there's going to be one solution. And I feel, again, the system is set up in such a way, through nepotism, somebody has
Capitalism.
X organisation that can do this, and that this is not working in connection or collaboration with other organisations to actually bring about a sound resolution. So it's difficult, and we can see through the government now, anything that's taken away in terms of money is always taken away from health and social care, it's taken away from the prison system. Look at the nonsense that they did earlier, where they released prisoners out into the community. They weren't making sure that they had the right provisions for when they were coming out, because the prison is full. Why wouldn't the prison be full? Because you've put so many people in there, and they don't necessarily need to be. Not all of them need to be in there. So I just, it's almost like it's a hamster wheel. They keep doing the same thing over and over again. Successive governments keep doing the same thing.
But like Benjamin said, I think it's about looking at that small area of what you can do to.
Can I ask, what can we do?
Yeah,
Rather than the system, what can we do?
I think Joe wanted to say something.
Yeah, I think it's understanding what systems we're talking about, how they work together, and how we can influence the systems. And also, I think an important part of it is how can we disrupt those systems.
That's it.
So it takes an understanding of the systems. It takes an understanding of who's within those systems. We talk about representation, but how can we be part of those systems? And there's some systems that we need to be part of. There's some systems that we need to tear down.
Yes.
You know, and I think you spoke about something that really resonates with me about there's no silver bullet. And I think that is even perpetuated by funding cycles, by the hero narrative that lies specifically even within the Black voluntary sector organization, where we will push the hero leader narrative. We will praise the celebrity of the organization whilst we're not doing the scaling deep and the supportive work that makes the work continue, but we will elevate the individual, celebrate the individual. For me, that's been a massive part of my journey. Is I chose, in the first year, I said yes to everything, podcasts and speaking here, speaking there, and I realized very quickly I wasn't in control of my narrative. And if I lent into the man them mentoring piece, that you know, like man's been on road, like done that, I would have just shot very quickly. For me, I knew that I had to step back and work out how to navigate that space and what my narrative was. And I think, you know, I've seen that those people that do that, their work might be good, but that perpetuates that same cycle. It's because then we're just looking for the next celebrity, the next headline, the next
it's about
flashy
owning
thing.
your own narrative in a way that will bring about that positive change you want to see. So it's about, yes, do I want to belong to the norm of people that, like you said, be a hero?
Yeah.
Because everybody can fall into that trap.
I think a key thing you said is taking a step back, right? And actually observing the landscape. The reason I'm taking more of a listening stance here, because I think I even told you before the podcast that I'm not going to come here and pretend like I'm an expert in all of this, but I'm here to listen and like understand the landscape. I've dipped in certain spaces through my journey in academia, but then I think something I've noticed is we keep having the same discussions and conversations.
Do you know what? Someone
over
said
and
this.
over
Someone
again.
said the other day we was in a. I guess it was
That's why I hate podcasts, by the way.
it was talking about it's talking about school exclusions. And you know, there was all these experts in the room, academics, experts in their fields, and someone said, you know what, sometimes we are in spaces where we just get very good at describing the water we're drowning in. And when he said that, it just resonated with me so deeply, because I try to make sure that I'm not participating in something for talking's sake. And I also understand that change must be disruptive. So for me, in my research, by design, my question, even if it is cloaked slightly, is who am I holding to account with this? What am I trying to disrupt, you know? And I think sometimes that's problematic also, when people have that intention and then they get the funding or they get to a certain position of power, and then all of a sudden,
and I think for me, that is what you're saying here is powerful. Just like you did the podcast and posters, and I believe that coming on this one is about the stories we tell, and that's where I believe that if I make myself vulnerable, I want to be as real as I can. It's not about saying what people want to hear, because we want to disrupt the normal things that people hear. It's about, how do we connect? How do we reach out to somebody that thinks I'm living in isolation here? I'm about the person on the ground. I'm not, we have systems, but how do we reach our community? How can we encourage them through the stories we tell? For me, that's been my narrative, and that's what I really want to push forward, because I know that we can make an impact.
I think just to jump in on that, and I said thank you for being here, because I have similar sentiments in terms of conversations, being part of panel discussions, all of that. And you hear the same conversations, the same phrases, the same sound bites being used. But then what frustrates me is I've seen the work you've done for over 20 years, right? I've seen how you've built things up in the background, not even being aware of social media or digital things like that. The young people that you've impacted, there was something that happened for me in uni. I didn't even know that someone knew you. Right. And then I met them and they're like, your auntie's this person. I was like, yeah. Because I've not grown up in South London. Right. And they were like, whoa, like and I didn't know, I still don't know the full story, but like the impact and the reach. Now, the reason I'm bringing that up is there's a lot of great work being done in communities, like people literally on the ground doing the work, connecting with individuals one on one, and actually bringing tools and solutions. But their work isn't being amplified, right? You've got these people who are being raised as celebrities or saviors of the movement, but the people who are actually doing the work, that work isn't being amplified, and they're not asking to be pushed up. But what I'm saying is the work and the solutions being amplified, like
That
what
is
is
the
actually
hope.
working on ground. And it also takes those in academia. It's a multi-pronged solution, right? Everyone has their skill sets. It takes those, like what you're doing with your research is very important, because you'll be able to give language to what's being done in
Yes.
communities, so that those who are policymakers and decision makers can understand in their language what works. And I brought up earlier in terms of business models and mathematical models not putting in certain things when they're modeling costs and the business side of things. And this is because I've been involved in conversations to do with sustainability, and they don't have the metric for like, okay, if we stop this, we may not see the impact now, but in years to come, it will actually have a beneficial effect on like our business as a whole.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, policymakers and those in power, until it starts affecting their pocket.
But this is the thing. When you first said that, you used the word eventually. And we work within systems that demand short-term outcomes and reward headlines and, you know, the bells and the whistles, right? And the deeper, meaningful work often gets missed then, you know. And I think one of the big pieces of work, so I spoke about upstream, so you could frame the work that I do is all around prevention. And I've always struggled to connect. I know what I'm trying to prevent young people from, but how can you quantify it? If you do a good piece of work in reception in primary school, you know, how can you measure the progress or what you've done, because it's not as quantifiable as ticking education, training and employment, right? So one of the big pieces of work that we've been doing recently, and we've been working with a consultant from the violence reduction unit, is around cost benefit analysis. And I think we're often in the voluntary sector asked the question, what happens when this person goes through this piece of work, X piece of work, whereas cost benefit analysis, to put in a really simplistic way, is essentially asking what happens if we don't.
Exactly.
So, you know, and for me, if we look at the cost of the reactive way that we currently work with young people around issues like exclusion and prison, you know, this crisis response, even look at the state of local authorities in London, how they're at the brink of collapse because they're spending so much money, you know, and there's data out there that shows us the predicted cost of each excluded cohort every year. And if we spend if we spend less money on prevention, it will save us money later on down the line. I think
More money on prevention.
if we spend even less money on prevention, it will save money later down the line. But
That's
I think
what they're saying.
the key is, the data shows us that, but the key is the time. Because also one of the big things that we're influenced by is political cycles. It's going to take longer than a 4-year political cycle to do that deeper, meaningful work. But for me, that's the drum that I'm always banging, is that cost benefit analysis, and how can we prove the prevention is working.
I would say, with my legal head on, research such as yours need to be used as part of case law when somebody's defending their client. They can say that, listen, you know, XYZ research shows that if this is done, it will save this. Because a lot of the research that is done by organisations as yourselves, they're not within the legal framework. cannot be referred to as part of case law, which they can be referred to once they start and have been habitually recited all the time. And I think it's when it's introduced into mechanisms like that, that then transition starts happening, can start happening. I'm not saying it's an immediate solution, but we need to start, because of the fact that we lack the research data, and I would say the UK research data, not like the US, then, you know, that data has not necessarily been shared in the key strategic places where change should be happening, and that's where that information needs to be introduced. So you know, for me, when a lawyer, a barrister is talking and saying to the judge that these are the reasons why this person should be here instead of going to jail, that's the research information that they will be sharing there.
It's such an interesting. I think I wish we could go on, but we're talking about hope. Is there hope? And I'm going to ask you to just give me one thing. Is there hope after prison? Is there hope for our families? Is there hope for our young people? Where are we going from here? I still remember, you know, I think it was my sister saying that in every book, in everything we do, in every story, if we don't present something that can be hopeful, then where are we going as a nation, as a community, as a family? So with what we were saying about hope, prison, and you're a testament to saying that there is hope, but can we say that for everybody? I think that is what we need to think about. And I think we've been bringing that up in terms of there is hope, but it's in different things. It's complicated. But let's see, Davlan, hope. Is there hope?
Yeah, I believe there's hope. I do. But I think it's the buck starts with us. What are we doing to help bring forth
In us,
that hope
in our
to
own
others?
little ways,
in our own little way.
And that's the work we've got to do, the confidence that we need to support parents. That's where I come from, that what can we do? What can I do in my way? I might not articulate as much as what other, but I still need to do it, and I need to be confident to do that. You, Joel?
Yeah, I think we spoke about systems, and that can take us to a very helicopter lens of the issues we're talking about. But something else that's been a theme in the conversations is kind of like the power of one, and what change can we make? What can I take responsibility for? And I think when we talk about hope, there's something very powerful in acknowledging the seeds of hope that we very often don't get to see blossom. And whether that is you as a practitioner, whether that's you as a friend, a member of community, a member of family, a member of a church congregation, whatever it is, I think we can all take responsibility for planting seeds of hope, you know, and some of those seeds of hope that were planted in my life weren't manifested or acknowledged or even understood until some of my darkest times, you know. So I always tell the people that I work with, it's not about you. So you planting seeds is not about you seeing that seed to fruition.
It might be after your lifetime anyway.
Exactly. It's about trusting that you've planted that seed in goodwill with, you know, the right heart, the right love, the right message behind it, knowing that that will make a difference. So I think for me, there's always hope. And I think, you know, we should take that as something that we can always plant seeds of hope without any resources. You can always do that.
Yeah, and let's not always like say there's nothing we can do, there's no resources, we can do something. Melanie?
Yes, there's hope when there's collective responsibility.
Thank you. Elia?
Yeah, there's hope.
There is hope. So there's hope. Hope for each and everyone. Hope for our families. Hope for our community. So you've been watching Echoes of Our Community. And we want to believe that we can't afford to give up. There is so much to do out there. And we are just a small collective aspect of that. So I'll see you next time. Watch this space. And please subscribe to this to watch. We want to hear from you on Echoes of Our Community. See you next time. Thank you.